Okay, we're going to continue Sermon on the Mount. So, in your Bibles, please turn to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew 5. We've been talking about. So we're in Matthew chapter 5. Sorry, go ahead and we're going to start at verse 38. But before that, I just want to say that in the Sermon on the Mount, where we're at right now, is we are in the section where Jesus is talking about mercy, and he's basically taking us through law after law after law to say, okay, this is how we normally would understand the law, but this is how it's interpreted if we're going to be merciful with this law. And so he says, yes, it is loving not to murder people, but it is also loving not to verbally force them to fight or to be abusive, to be verbally abusive to people. We don't want to be doing that either. That it is loving not to commit adultery, but it is also loving not to be involved in sexual harassment, even to the degree of staring at the opposite sex with lust. We don't want to be doing that. That's not loving. It is sure, if you're going to divorce, that you want to make sure that you do it in the right legal way. But if you're going to divorce, you also have to consider your partner to see what is going to be good or bad for them. What is going to be right or wrong for them if you decide to break up? What is going to harm them or not? So, like for instance, Jesus talked about how in his day, men would just divorce women, and then they'd be forced to go and marry the first person that they could find who would, because otherwise they are nobodies in society, and they're not able to function in that society. And so Jesus is just saying that even in that kind of a context, you gotta make sure. And then last time we talked about oaths, and he said it is loving to keep your promises to God. If you make a promise to God, sure, it's important to keep it. And then he says, now keep all your promises, even the little ones. Just keep your promises without exception, because that's loving too. You don't have to bring God into it in order to keep your word. Okay, so these are the sorts of things that he's been talking about up to this point. And so today we're going to get into some of the heavies. This week and next week, we're going to get into the heavy things. And so up to this point, it's been pretty light. Honestly, this has been nothing up to this point. Oh, sure, we don't want to verbally abuse people. We don't want to sexually harass people. Okay, great. We've got that. Now we're going to get into some heavy stuff that is going to be a little bit more difficult, but like the last couple that we had, there's some background that we've got to give here, and I just ask you to be patient with me to get through the background, and then we'll do that. But first we need to read the passage. So is there somebody who would like to read Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 to 42, just 4 verses? Go ahead.
You have heard of the saying, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, offer no resistance to one who is evil. When someone strikes you on your right cheek, turn the other one on to him as well. If anyone wants to go to law with you over your tunic, hand him your cloak as well. How far should I go?
You got to go through 42, so 2 more verses.
Should someone press you into service for 1 mile, go with him for 2 miles. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn your back on one who wants to borrow.
Okay, great. Actually, I would love to hear somebody else read it in a different translation, because different translations sound a little different.
This was the international.
Okay.
You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you.
Okay. So Jesus, once again, he's doing the whole thing of he's bringing up a law from the Old Testament, and then he's making his own comment on it. This time, it is not a law from the Ten Commandments. Um, and in fact, interestingly enough, it isn't so much a law of what you do or don't do, but it is a law that talks about punishment. Law talks about how to punish somebody. So the basic eye for eye, tooth for tooth. We've all heard this. One thing that's interesting to note that the phrase eye for eye, tooth for tooth is older than Moses. Moses, it wasn't just given to Moses. We also find the same phrase in the Code of Hammurabi, which was written before Moses. And so this is a common phrase that was just around. The idea of it is that if someone did something wrong to you, then you would then the state or somebody would do the same thing back. So if somebody, the idea is if somebody pokes out your eye, you would have the right to poke out their eye.
But no more, trying to avoid that 30% increase.
Right. Yeah. So that's the thing, is trying to limit revenge to only as much as what they did to you. And so there's a lot of laws in the Old Testament, in the books of Moses, that try to explain that try to say, okay, yeah, that means that if this person does X to you, then this is the punishment. So if so, for instance, we talked about this a little bit ago. So if you've got two guys and they're fighting, and a woman comes up and pulls somebody's private parts in the fight, then she gets her hand cut off. But that's all. She doesn't die. And in a lot of societies, she would have died. So see how much better that is, that she only gets her hand cut off. Right? Right? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so but that's the idea of it. It's supposed to limit. It's supposed to limit the punishment. But the other thing is basically it's also a part of what is known as karma. Basically, that karma is the perfect balance of you get what it is that you deserve. And so this talks about the punishment side of karma. Now in karma, there's two sides to it. There's the punishment side, and then there's the reward side. If you did something bad, then something bad will happen to you on an equal level of what it is that the universe will keep the balance, and somehow the universe will make sure that your punishment is at the same level as the bad thing that you did somebody else. Now there's also a good side to that, which means if you did something good, then the universe will keep the balance and make sure that something good happens to you to the degree that it does. But because we see that in our lives, karma doesn't actually work out most of the time, because bad people do bad things and nothing happens to them, or sometimes good things happen to them, and good people do good things, and a lot of times bad things happen to them. So the idea of karma is kind of a universal one. Well, it's not going to work out in this life necessarily, but it'll balance out in the next one, or it's not working out so well in this life, but it'll all be balanced out on Judgment Day, one way or the other. So the idea is this. Now Jesus, it's interesting. Jesus does talk about karma in this way, but he mostly talks about the other side. So he will say, if you give, it will be given to you. And in fact, even more than that will be given to you. So Jesus didn't believe in karma. Jesus believed that if you did something really good and positive, if you give to a poor person or something like that, it's going to come up even more. And if you forgive, then you will be forgiven. So you do that good thing where you forgive, and you're going to be forgiven. And this is the way that Jesus saw it. This is the thing that Jesus emphasized. Now Jesus is talking about the other side. Okay, well, what about punishment? If we're going to punish people, and he says, okay, you've heard it said eye for eye. And so the thing is that what Jesus is talking to, though, is not just eye for eye, meaning let's limit it to this way, but more eye for eye of if somebody does anything bad to me, I'm going to make sure that I get back at them. I have the right to take whatever it is that they took from me. By the way, there was one thing in the law in the Old Testament that is absolutely not eye for eye. If you stole a sheep, you have to pay 4 back. If you stole an ox, you have to pay 5 back. That's the law. I don't know why that one is different than all the other ones. I'm not really sure, because they're so strict about eye for eye. But when it comes down to theft, it's just like you steal anything, you're going to have to pay way more back. Which is why in Luke 19, Jesus talks to Zacchaeus, and he says, if I have cheated anyone out of any money, I will pay them back 4 times as much. He's following the law. He knows what the law says, and he's following what the law says. So,
Well, it sounds like the Wild West, a horse thief has
oh yeah,
got real problems.
a horse thief would just be killed, right?
Yeah.
Because he was, I mean, if you take somebody's horse out in the middle of nowhere, you are something into that.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
what you're doing. You're murdering somebody. A lifelong slow murder.
Okay, so this is the basic thing of what Jesus is talking to. So Jesus says in response to this, okay, not eye for eye, but instead don't resist an evil person. But even if Jesus is talking about, okay, this person did something bad to you, and I want to get revenge, and Jesus says don't resist an evil person. Is that exactly in response to that? Okay, what I want to do is I want to find out a little bit clearer about what Jesus is talking about by looking at the examples that Jesus gave. Jesus gives 4 or 5 examples. And so let's look at the examples that Jesus gives so we can have a better idea of what it is that Jesus is talking about. Okay? First of all, you've got the slapping. Okay? Whoever slaps you on the right cheek, offer him the other also. Everyone knows about that. The whole idea of turn the other cheek and all of that. Okay? Now the thing is that any authority in Jesus' day, any authority, and actually at any time in the ancient world, and almost any society of the ancient world, any authority had the right to slap an underling. Any authority had the right to slap an underling. So, if you were a slave master, you had the right to slap your slaves. In fact, most people would say you had the responsibility to slap your slaves if they went out of line. If you were a husband, you had the responsibility to slap your wife because you were in charge of your wife. If you were a parent, you have the responsibility to slap your kid. We still do that. It's just we don't slap the face anymore. We do the other cheek. We turn the other cheek. No. Anyway. And so...
So are you saying that Jesus is telling us if somebody slaps you in the face
to moon them? Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Yes. If anyone slaps you on the one cheek, just drop trowel.
moon them something?
Moon them. Okay. Yep.
That'll do it.
There we go.
I've heard that explained that people were right-handed and there was a way of turning your cheek that made it impossible for them to strike you again. That turning your cheek, it was...
Well, the idea behind that is, see, if you are being slapped on the right cheek, which is what Jesus says here, well, which hand are you using? If you're being slapped on the right cheek, so here's your cheek, this is the right side. And so if somebody is facing you and they're slapping, then which hand are they using? Well, they'd use the left hand, except that they can't use the left hand because you never use your left hand because that's the poop hand. You don't use the poop hand. for anything. You certainly don't use it to touch somebody else with. So that means you are backhanding them. You're using your right hand, but you're backhanding them. So the idea behind that is if you turn the other cheek, they can't backhand you. That doesn't mean they can't slap you full on, give you a full on slap. And here we actually have a number of examples in the Bible of people slapping each other. That happen pretty regularly. So here we have Paul. He's going before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling group. And I'm sorry, if you wanted to look this up, this is Acts chapter 23, starting at verse 1, but I'll read it to you. So Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and said, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in good conscience to this day." At this, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to law, yet you violate the law by commanding that I be struck." And there were those standing near Paul said, "How could he possibly insult God's high priest?" And Paul said, "Oh, I didn't know that was the high priest." And he says, "It is written, do not speak evil about the ruler of your peoples." So he backed off because he realized that the high priest had the right to have him slapped. Even if he doesn't like it, the high priest had the legal and moral right to have him slapped because he was his authority. And so he backed off. So at first he says, "Oh, you whitewash wall, you hypocrite," and all that. And then he's like, "Oh, sorry, never mind. I misspoke." Which Paul almost never did. Paul almost never apologized for that. Anyway, so that's one context. So you got somebody being slapped. It is always a person who is over you, and you had to take it because it was their legal right and responsibility to punish you if you got out of line. Just like Paul. Paul went out of line, so the high priest had him slapped. Okay. I know. Aren't you glad we don't live in those days anymore? Yeah. Okay. Second one is suing for one's cloak or coat. There's different translations. Tunic is also used. There's different translations, but basically there's an outer garment and an inner garment. The outer garment is like a coat, and then the inner garment is like a shirt. And everyone had an outer garment and an inner garment. Inner garment was basic everyday stuff. The outer garment was a little bit heavier, and you'd wear it if it was cold or something like that. Okay, so I want to read to you Exodus chapter 22, which explains a little bit about that. Exodus 22 has the law: if you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you are not to act as a creditor to him. You shall not charge him interest. And if you ever take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you are to return it to him before the sun sets. So the basic idea is that if you owed a person money, then they had the right to take your coat. But according to this law, you had to give it back at night and then give it back during the day. Which seems a little convoluted, but that's the law because, of course, the guy is too poor. He doesn't have anything else. If the only thing he has, the only extra thing he has is his coat, then you better give it back to him at night because he's going to need it at night because that's his sleeping bag. That's as much as he's got. And so give it back to him because otherwise you're going to kill the guy. But the basic thing is, the idea is, if a person was really poor and they owed them money, then they would offer a garment as pledge. They'd offer a garment as pledge to make sure that they would still owe that money. All right, next one, go the extra mile. Most of us have heard about this one. So Roman law said that they can conscript any non-citizen to carry their pack for a mile. They can, so basically, so if a Roman can go up to a Jewish person and say, here, carry my pack for 1 mile, follow me for a mile and carry my pack. And they have to follow them for that mile. And then when the mile is over, they put down the pack and then they have to walk back. Okay. And that was normal everyday procedure. That was typical. Also, and this is probably where it says, give to those who ask of you and do not deny to loan to someone who asks to borrow of you. Probably the same kind of context. Probably also a soldier, because once again, soldiers can also conscript possessions. They can take possessions and just say, I'm going to borrow this and I'll give it back to you sometime. And so they would, so they could borrow things, and that was totally legal. So all of these things that are going on sound really awful, but they're all legal. Okay, so a few things I want you to notice. Every single one of these contexts have to do with somebody who is in authority over somebody else. So it's an authority, and then the person who's under the authority is having something, some kind of oppression happen to them. Something evil or bad is happening. They're having their stuff taken. They are being forced to, being smacked around, being forced to go to places. So all of these contexts have to do with an authority and a lesser person, a person who is legally being forced to do something that is horrible, being forced to give up what is rightfully theirs. Okay, so all of these contexts have to do with that, and that is important to know. So let's say you are that person. You are that person and you're being oppressed, but it's legal to do it. And you say, oh, those damn Romans. Oh man, I hate those Romans. I hate these people who think that they have the right to slap me at any time. Next time a person slaps me, says in the law, eye for eye, I'm just going to slap them back. That's what I'll do. I'll slap them back. I'm just going to slap them. If they try to take my stuff, I'm going to defend myself because that's my stuff and they're stealing it from me. Oh, if someone tries to make me go a mile, I'm going to stand my ground and say, no, I'm not going to do that. You try to force me. Then I'll teach them. Now, of course, what happens if you do that kind of thing?
The Romans had a long.
They did. And they had weapons,
Better weapon.
way better weapons. Yeah. So you get hurt because, of course, they're the authority and they have the legal right to punish you if you decide that you're going to act eye for eye, tooth for tooth. If you decide you're going to do that, then they're going to punish you because they can. So let's say nowadays we have police officers who are every once in a while in a situation where they will kill an innocent person. And let's say that a family member decided that they were going to do eye for eye. That would not work out very well. That would not be a good thing. And so when Jesus is saying, this is not the context to apply eye for eye. This is not the sort of thing you should do. Instead, Jesus says you should not resist the evildoer. He says you should not resist the evildoer. Now, when he says do not resist the evildoer, this is the command. Do not resist the evildoer. He's saying three things. And one of those things is really uncomfortable. But it makes sense if you look at all of it. Okay, so let me explain this. So first of all, Jesus is saying it is we have the right, nay, even the responsibility to call legal injustice evil. Because that's what Jesus just did. He said that if you have a soldier or a police officer or whatever taking your stuff, that is evil. It may be a legal evil, but it's still evil. And we can call it evil. And the person who did that is an evildoer. Jesus is not talking about their motivation. He's not talking about their intent. All he's talking about is what they did. If a person goes to a homeless camp and takes their stuff that they need to survive, according to Jesus, we need to call that evil because it is evil. Because the action is evil, whether the person doing it, no matter what their intent or motive is, they may just have a job. Probably do, just have a job. But nevertheless, the action is evil, and therefore they are an evildoer. Why are they an evildoer? Because they are breaking God's higher command. The command of God, of course, is to love your neighbor as yourself. And nobody wants somebody to go in and say, you don't need this bed, you don't need your blankets, you don't need your heater, I'm taking it all. Nobody wants that. Well, then why does anybody think that they can do that to somebody else? Because it's legal, that's why. Because that's probably how they're making the money. Because they've been told by authorities to do this kind of thing. And so they think that it's okay, but it's not. Jesus says we need to recognize this as evil. If police killing unarmed people is evil. It's just evil. Let's not make any excuse for it. Let's not turn our heads away from it. Let's not just shake our head and say, oh my goodness, what is the world coming to? No, it's evil. Let's call it evil. Let's just call it evil. Let's not try to make it, let's not try to say, well, the police officer. No, it doesn't matter. It's still evil. When 12-year-olds are being shot and killed, that is evil. I don't care who did it. Now trying to solve it, that's a different thing. But I think we need to recognize that when we see evil in the world, we need to, if we see people who are abusing people because they're poor, if we see landlords abusing people because they're poor, we see people raising rents $1,000 in a month, we need to call it what it is. It's evil. We just have to do that. Okay, because there are people. If it is the definition of evil, according to the Bible, is that which harms another, especially if they are innocent, meaning that it's not a punishment; they're just there living their lives, or if they are helpless. In other words, there was nothing else that they could do. And those are the situations. Anytime that kind of thing happens, when somebody harms another, especially if they're innocent or helpless, then according to Scripture, that's what's called evil. Once again, that doesn't talk about intent. We may have intended to not do something bad. But this is the thing that we see in the Bible a lot. Jesus talks about that a lot, about the context in which we find ourselves in a corner where we are forced to do something bad, and we don't feel good about it, but we don't feel like we can do anything else either. And in this society, we all are in that place. We all end up doing things that we know aren't right, but we don't really have much choice because our boss tells us to do it this way, because we have to, because the government tells us to do it this way, because our neighborhood tells us to do it this way, or whatever. And we've all been in that context. We've all been in that situation. And it is interesting to me that Jesus actually came to deliver us from sin like that. Jesus came to save us from sin. What sin? The little sins that we're doing, yes, but especially the sins that we're forced to do. Jesus came to deliver us from that. Okay, so First of all, we're going to call these things evil. Oh yeah, I had one more example because. Oh no, I've got other examples. Oh, look at this. The U.S. stealing land from Native Americans. Guess what? That's evil. I'm just saying it. It's evil. I don't care what anybody thinks or what use the U.S. was going to use for that land. You steal it from somebody else. It's evil. Okay? Sending people who grew up in the United States, and this is the only place that they've ever lived, and sending them back to a country that they've never had, they don't have any memory of. They've really, for all intents and purposes, they've never been there before. Sending them over there. Why? Because of some legal loophole? That's evil. That's just evil. It's evil. Also, police tossing tear gas at peaceful protesters is evil. Just want to say it. I have said it. I feel better because I've said that. Okay, that's the first thing Jesus says. Go ahead, and if you see evil, even if it's legal, call it evil. That doesn't mean you're telling anybody what the intent of somebody is. You're just saying that's an evil thing. Okay. Number 2, Jesus says, don't resist. Don't fight back. Don't do the eye for eye. Don't threaten or harm somebody else because they did harm to you. And this is especially in the context of authority, but it goes in other ways. Jesus is saying, go ahead and let them arrest you, let them beat you up, let them take your possessions, and let them harm you. This does not sound like fun. And I know of certain people that would just say, oh, well, I'm not going to put up with that. No, if they try to take anything of mine, man, I'm going to be right there, and I'm going to deal with it. But remember what we were talking about. You try to do an eye for eye, and it ends up getting you in trouble. Okay? And so you say, well, I'm not going to let them take my possessions. Well, okay, you're going to get arrested anyway. And the possessions will get taken because they have guns and they have methods of forcing you to do what it is that you don't want to do. So it's going to be bad anyway. And so when Jesus says don't resist, he means don't fight them, don't harm them, don't punish them for their evil. Yes, they are doing evil. We already said that, but we're not going to punish them for it. And that's why it's not comfortable. See, because when there's evil, we want there to be punishment. That's how come every time that a cop shoots a kid or something like that and they get off scot-free with nothing happening to them, there's riots and people are so upset because we recognize that was an evil thing that happened and there should be some punishment. Somebody should be punished. That's our sense of right and wrong. Somebody ought to be punished. And Jesus is saying, no, don't punish them. And it's like, Jesus, you just don't understand human beings. You don't understand the way that we actually think. We don't like that. We're not for that. Isn't it? The Old Testament understands this a lot better because what we really want to do is chop people's heads off. And instead, they're just telling us to chop people's hands off. We get that. We got to keep it mellow. That I understand. And Jesus says, no, don't do that at all. Number one, because authority is always going to come out ahead, no matter what, which we talked about already. They're going to fight back. If you resist them, they're going to fight back even stronger. And whatever bad thing was going to happen by not resisting, it's going to be worse. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you've got a homeless camp, people are coming in, they're trying to take your possessions, and you say, no, I'm not going to do that. And then you are going to get arrested or you're going to get beat up. It's this possibility you're going to get killed. Anyway, the other reason that Jesus is saying that is because if you start doing evil like the evil that they're doing to you, that makes you evil. This is actually the more important thing. Jesus is okay with us suffering and us getting beat up by authorities. He doesn't have any problem with that, actually. In fact, he tells us to get used to it. Oh, yeah, of course it's going to happen. Yeah. Okay, but what he doesn't want us to do is he doesn't want us to be evil like the person who did evil back to us. He says, don't stoop to their level. Don't be that kind of person. Don't be an evildoer. We got to stand up and we got to do what's right. And because if we end up being an evildoer, even though we're just responding to the evil that they did to us, then we're going to be judged by God. Now, mind you, they're going to be judged by God too. But if we start doing evil back to them, akin to the evil that they did to us, then God is going to be judging us too. And that's not going to work either. Because we don't want to be judged by God, because as much as being judged by the police or being judged by judges or whatever, as bad as that is, being judged by God is way worse. That's a really bad thing. And so Jesus doesn't want us to do that. All right. So first of all, Jesus says, let's call it, if it's evil, let's call it evil. Second of all, he says, don't resist, don't fight back, don't do evil in response to the evil. Third thing Jesus says is we're just going to call this go the extra mile. And this is the crazy thing. This is where Jesus goes from up to this point, it's been decent, moral, wise advice. Now we've gone into crazy. Because Jesus is saying, someone slaps you, turn the other cheek so they can slap you again. That's the point. So they can slap. Why, Jesus? I don't want to be slapped again. I didn't like it the first time.
Can I have a huddle?
I know. I know. Now, can't I just say I'm sorry? How about that? I'll just say I'm sorry, and we'll just leave it at that. How about that? You know, what about if they steal my possessions? I don't want to give them more. That's insane. That's ridiculous, because before I had X amount, and then they take this amount, and now you want me to have even less. That doesn't make any sense. Why does he want us to do that? So you got the guy with the coat, okay? And so the creditor has the coat, and he says, go ahead and give him your shirt too. It's cold. Why give him the shirt? Now I've got nothing. I'm practically naked. It's horrible. Well, actually, in Bible terms, you are naked. That's what wearing underwear is naked in the Bible. So, that's just that you're naked now. Oh my goodness. And so I'm supposed to give him everything and just walk away naked? And so that's what Francis did. And everyone thought he was crazy. St. Francis did that. Walked away. Everybody thought he was crazy. I don't want to be crazy. Okay. It is crazy. It is kind of crazy, but it's crazy like a fox. Because here's the thing. Let's go back to the passage in Exodus 22 about the guy taking the cloak. Okay, so if you want to look it up, once again, Exodus 22, starting at verse 25. Exodus 22:25. So the law says, if you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you are not to act like a creditor, you will not charge him interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you're to return it to him before the sun sets, because that's his only covering. It is his cloak for his body. What else shall he sleep in? And it shall come about that if he cries to me, I will hear him, for I am gracious. Well, what does that mean? In the context, it means if this poor person cries to God because you took too much, because you took it and he can't survive anymore, then God says, I am going to kill you. That's the context. The context is you oppress too much, I kill you. The whole thing with go the extra mile. Romans were allowed to take someone to walk with them a mile. They are not allowed to do 2 miles. If they do 2 miles, they get punished. They will be punished if they overextend their authority. The person who's slapping, like the case with Paul in the Sanhedrin, the high priest told him to be slapped. Well, okay, so he was slapped, but if he was slapped multiple times, then everyone would be backing off and say, wait a minute, That's not right. We can't be doing that. That's against the law. Just like how if a person, a judge or governor or king had the right, according to both Jewish and Roman law, they had the right to whip someone less than 40 times. But if you did it 40 times is abuse. 39 times is okay, which is why Jesus was whipped 39 times, because 40 times is abuse. But if Jesus had been able to trick them into doing it 40 times, then they get punished. A judge or king or whatever, they're going to get punished for over punishing. This is what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about put the authorities in a situation, offer them more than what they should be doing, so that way they're going to be punished.
Do you think it also kind of is a wake up to that authority? Because I think about if you're being abused by authority and then you submit, it's like kind of that human moment for them.
And I think that shows the difference between different kinds of authorities. Certainly some authorities would say, well, wait a minute, what are you talking about? I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
No, forget it. Just
Yeah.
leave me alone.
Yeah.
Some will do that.
Right.
Some won't.
Yeah.
Some will say, oh yeah, no, I deserve that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
It seems like it's an opportunity.
It's a test
Yeah,
to
but
the
that's a
authority.
test. They
Yes,
can,
a
they can
test.
either accept that extra that they're not actually supposed to have,
Right.
or they can say no.
Yeah.
And
prove
Jesus,
that they're-
and Jesus is all about these tests. He likes these kinds of tests. Remember, he sent the apostles to go with no shoes, no money, nothing, no extra, so they looked like the poorest people in the world coming into a new town. And they looked dirty, and they looked filthy, and they were coming into a new town. And Jesus was testing that town to see if they were going to help the poor person or whether they were going to reject the poor person. That was the test. It's the kind of test that Jesus likes. Even so, he's saying, test authorities. If they are doing evil, you're giving them an opportunity to either do what you were saying, back away and say, oh, wait, I can't go that far. Or if they're going to say, yeah, give them enough rope to hang themselves. Yeah. So, and here's the thing is that, and so what Jesus is saying in the different contexts, so for the person who is the creditor and who would take more than the coat or take it longer than he's supposed to, it says in the Bible that God is going to punish that person and kill that person because God is the protector of the poor. So in the end, God is the final court. He's the final judge. A lot of times we think that the highest court in the land is the Supreme Court. It's not, it's God. God is higher than the Supreme Court. And you could take things to the Supreme Court, but that doesn't mean it's done. Because God is the final judge, and God will ultimately punish evildoers, even if they're masking under law. God does that. But also, Jesus is also talking about contexts in which, just in the natural order of things, authorities would be punished because they've gone too far. For instance, like going the extra mile. The Roman soldier would be punished if they forced a person to go 2 miles instead of just 1.
But if the person volunteers,
It's
it's not a force.
And which person is going to be believed? The person who gained the benefit from it, or the person who did that? Well, he wanted to go that extra mile. Really? Okay, sure. I suppose they might give some soldiers the benefit of the doubt, but it doesn't sound very good for him, honestly. Anyway, but it's the law, and Jesus is saying, force him, or not force him, but give him the opportunity to break the law, to take it. And so, so Jesus is talking about what this could be: God who's giving the ultimate judgment, or human court and human authority could be doing the same thing. So, for instance, well, we already talked about that if there was a judge and they ordered a person who was whipped 40 or more times, then that judge would lose their station. They'd lose their authority because they were affirming more things. Pontius Pilate lost his governorship because he overly punished the Samaritans. Because there was a protest going on, the Samaritans, and he went in there, wiped out everybody in the protest, and tore down their temple. And so Caesar knocked him down, took away his governorship because of over punishing. And this is the basic way that the whole civil rights movement was set up as. Put yourself in a situation in which you are an innocent, in which you are just sitting there and doing your normal rights. And if they punish you, then you take it to a higher court. You take it to court, or maybe a higher court, until finally they did it. That's how it worked with Rosa Parks. Of course, Rosa Parks, as we all know, didn't just decide one day that she was too tired and sat down on the bus. It was planned. And she wasn't the first one to do it. It's just that she was the only kind of lady who was a little who looked more pathetic than any of the other people who did it before. So it actually got some legal traction going. But even sitting at the lunch counters, the training for sitting at the lunch counters for all of them was they would sit down and they would be beaten by white people until they could deal with it without responding, without resisting.
Oh,
That was how Martin Luther King trained his people. I would hate to have been one of those white guys
Oh my gosh, not a chance.
who was chosen to beat
Yeah.
on these other people. But that was the training, because Martin Luther King knew that what he had to train his people to do was to not resist. They had to not be the evildoers. They had to have people do evil to them, and things would change.
That was vital. That it be so obvious that they were not the ones in the wrong.
Right? And we are still doing the same thing today. So, for instance, right now we have homeless sweeps going on, and there is a law. It's a very general law, but there is a law which gives limits to how you can take homeless people's stuff. So, for instance, you have to post 72 hours before you take something. And then after that 72 hours, you can take a homeless person's possessions on public property. Private property has different rules. And then after you take it, you have to hold it for 30 days. You hold the items for 30 days. And then if they come back and they ask for those items, you have to give it back to them. That's the law in Oregon. So
does it happen?
well, sometimes. And now just recently,
Yeah.
there was an organization who took items. A person was out; they were gone to get a shower, and then a cleanup crew came and took everything that they had. Took their tent, took their sleeping bag, took their heater, took their stove, took everything that they had, and they threw it away. They did not store it for 30 days. So an advocate calls the people and says, "Oh, you took this stuff. Where is it?" And they're like, "Oh, well, we couldn't keep it." and so that, rather than get sued for that, they went ahead and paid for replacement of the items, which is a lot of times what happens is backroom deals and all that. But this is what we're doing. We're taking pictures of people's stuff whose camps are in danger, taking pictures of all their items. And so that way, if somebody goes and does this act of evil of taking their items, then we can go and we say, okay, we want this, 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 and this, because this is their stuff. And if they say, and we don't know, but if they say, well, we don't have that stuff, then they can be sued according to law.
So am I the evildoer?
Are you the evildoer? Okay. Well, I mean, I didn't know you were going to be here tonight, but okay, you asked. This is why I'm talking about it's the system that's making us do these things. You were put in a place where you had a community, a whole group that was forcing you to do things that you may not have done yourself. You had people telling you stories. You had people fining you. You had a whole community that was going against the very thing that you wanted to do to help. And so you were put in a corner, and you had to do the thing that you wanted that you didn't want to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We talked about this a few weeks ago. I mean, that very thing about how our society forces us to often do things that we wouldn't do if we had a way around it.
And you know what? You know what ends up happening is our society or these other groups or whatever force us to do these things, and who feels guilty about it? We do.
Yeah, that's right.
The other people don't care. Number one, because they didn't have
They got
direct.
what they wanted.
They got what they
And they
wanted.
didn't have to do it.
Yep, and they didn't have to do it. That's right. And so that's the thing. So if and so this is the way that society has always worked, is to force us to do things that we don't want to do. There are things at the Red Barn that I definitely did not want to do, and I couldn't do. I couldn't morally do them, force people off the property and stuff like that. But as a manager, when I wasn't the owner, so I couldn't decide about that. As the manager, there were things that I had to do that were evil. And it's one of the reasons why I realized I had to quit, because it was driving me insane. It's because I was having to force people to do things that they couldn't do, but I couldn't have them stay, otherwise we were going to lose the whole thing. And in the end, I think that it was better to lose the whole thing than to be forced in a situation where I'm forced to do evil, because somebody else is calling the shots. And every single job that we've ever had eventually does the same thing. They're going to ask us to do things, and it can be the most innocuous job. But nevertheless, at one point or another, they're going to ask us to do things that we know are wrong. Because that's the way our society works. So, were you an evildoer? Yes, I'm sorry. So am I. Because when I was at the Red Barn, I did things that were evil because I had authorities telling me to do them. And you had authorities telling you to do this. And that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't make me feel better.
Yeah. Doesn't make me feel.
Yeah.
It made me feel better either.
It does.
Walk on the street and all, but
So it doesn't make me feel better. However, there's two things. First of all, Jesus died to free us from these sins. He died to free us from these kinds of sins where we're forced to do evil and we're in a social situation that we have to. He died, and when he died, there were a couple things that he did. First of all, he showed us that these systems are evil. He showed us that the systems are evil, and so we need to recognize that they're evil. And secondly, he gave us a different system for us to live under. He gave us a new kingdom and a new way of acting in mercy and a new law in which we would always act in love, no matter what anybody else was doing. And that also means Jesus said that in this context, if we're acting like the kingdom, but we're in a society that says that you can't act that way, that means, he said, that we will be punished. And Jesus' response to that is, "Blessed are you who are persecuted for the sake of the Son of Man." And this is why, and it's, it was really hard when I'm in charge of the Red Barn, but it's churches who are telling me to do things. And so it's hard for me to recognize, that by obeying this church, I am going against what Jesus wants me to do. It was hard. It was hard for me to get that in my head. And other people sound so reasonable, our bosses or whatever, because they've got good reasons for all the things, all the evil things that they're talking about. You got good reasons to I know of people on the street, and they literally have a dozen or 20 shopping carts full of junk that they have all over the place, but it's still evil to take it away from them. And it makes sense that people say, well, you can't have all these shopping carts around. Yeah, you know what? You're right. It isn't good. But we've got to have a solution apart from doing more evil to people who are already mentally ill to begin with.
Because if they've got 20 shopping carts.
Exactly.
I mean, just obviously.
Yeah. And so what are we going to do? Well, I don't know what we're going to do, but let's not do evil. That's the one thing that Jesus, if we got anything from this, no matter what the context, no matter what it is that people are trying to force us in, no matter what it is that people do to us, let's not respond with doing evil. Let's find some other way. And if that other way is just like, well, I'm just going to stand here and take whatever punishment you have to give me, but I got to do what's right. And I wish that I had done that at the Red Barn. I wish that I had just stood and said, well, I'm not going to tell these people to leave because I just can't do that. And the funny thing is that that's what a lot of times Travis did, and I wouldn't. See a lot of people stay who are in bad situations, and I'm just like, well, I'm stuck. I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place, Anyway. Okay. But this is all when Jesus says turn the other cheek, he's basically saying put the responsibility back on them, back on the authority. Give it back to them. And just say, well, if you want to do extra evil, if you want to punish me harder, go ahead. I'll let you. That's what he's saying. So
It's still evil.
But it's still evil. And so give it back to them. Now, a lot of times when people say the phrase turn the other cheek, what they think it means, go ahead and let anyone abuse you. That's not what Jesus is talking about. He's not saying let anybody abuse you. If your friend comes up and slaps you on the cheek, go ahead and slap him back. Okay, maybe not slap him back. If he slaps you on the cheek, you don't have to turn the other cheek because it's not going to be anything if it's just your friend. Okay, nothing else is going to happen from that. Instead, what Jesus says in that kind of a context is love your enemy. We'll talk about that next week. Okay, that's a different situation. Okay. Also uncomfy. Okay.